11 a.m. We had a slightly smaller crowd here in Atlanta, at least, but we did have people from around the world join us. So, so we're gonna just to show that we have people around the world. We hope we are going to do a little roll call, and in the spirit of going back to school, can everybody in the U.S., including here in Atlanta, say here?
Here.
How about any of our colleagues where it would be quite late from Asia? They are going to be glued to the video version of the Global Town Hall, and they were here earlier. How about East Central and Southern Africa?
Yeah.
Hey, Mozambique.
Great. How about Latin America and the Caribbean? How about the Middle East and North Africa? How about West Africa?
Hi, everybody.
Great. And anybody from the Shared Services Center in Manila? Yeah, very late. All right, good. Well, we are grateful to everyone who was able to join and look forward to, as you all know, we do 2 versions of this, and I think it's also videotaped so that folks can watch it at another time. So we have a really packed agenda. We did it in an hour this morning, and we'll see if we can be equally ambitious and talk very fast, I think.
Yeah.
But we are going to start with look back. We're just going to have a short update from Peter about our financial record in the year that's just ended, FY17. So both revenue and expense. We're also, I'm not quite ready for you, but almost. And we're going to talk about strategy. We're going to start with sort of a broad update in a variety of different spheres around our humanitarian response around the world. We're going to talk about how we're meeting the challenges in new ways around resource development and fundraising. We're going to have an update from Michelle Carter about our impact growth strategy in Southern Africa. And we're going to end with an update around people and culture, which we know is foundational to all of our work and our capacity to meet our objectives. We're going to have a little bit of time, we hope, for Q&A and also for announcements. And also I'll make an announcement later on that front. I wanted to note that the framework which we continue to look to is the 5 bold moves, the strategy. Today we'll focus on the first, innovation to multiply our impact, resourcing the future, and also people, leadership, and culture. And so Peter, because he has a good report to give, is very eager this morning to share our news about how we did in FY17, what were some of the things that we are learning, and how are we building towards the aggressive goals that we've set for ourselves in the strategic plan. And for those of you all who are coming in, please don't hesitate to come. There's a whole row where you can sit next to me, which seems to always be the case. So I'm going to hand it to Peter.
Thanks, Michelle, and good day and good evening around the world. Fiscal year 17, our results are unaudited. We closed our books last week. Thank you, everybody. Shout out to everybody around the world who made that happen, in country offices, Atlanta, Shared Service Center. And if we're looking at our big picture, our total revenue, our total expense, we broke the $600 million barrier for the first time since fiscal year 2009. So it's been a long time coming. And it's a 16% increase of our revenue compared to 16. And we set out in bold move 1 and 2 to multiply impact and to really raise the additional resources, to actually enable to do that. And I think, around the world, great job, especially as we were responding to crisis around the world. We wrote a lot of proposals. We're driving a lot of additional humanitarian programming. That's where the bulk of the growth has been. And that really, means that, we're aligning our resources with our mission. On the unrestricted side, the news is not quite as good. That is the component where actually we lagged a little bit. Now, on the expense side, if we came in $2 million under budget, which means we managed our unrestricted spending very well. That's good. Thank you, everybody who contributed to that. On the revenue side, we fell $6 million short, and that was further short than we had hoped. About half of that is timing differences. And in fact, that money is already in the bank, and it means that we're going to, have to exceed our budget in fiscal year 18. About half of it was a miss, as we did not get some of the parts of our campaign, fully up to speed as early in the fiscal year as we had hoped. So it means that, we're going to obviously have to continue to very carefully manage our unrestricted, our expenses. We're going to have to look at what we have learned from on the fundraising side, on the indirect cost recovery side, on how we are sure to meet our 18 targets, because we continue to have an aggressive goal in fiscal 18. If we look a little bit at the trend line, in the strategy we had clearly stated, right, that we were going to focus on especially growing our U.S. funding, our U.S. private and the U.S. government funding. And you can see that that's really where the growth came from 16 to 17. That 16%, almost all of it came from U.S. sources, and that is expected to continue to grow in fiscal 18. The 16%, is really a remarkable step up after we had been stagnant for about 3 years. So if we then see how do we really spend our money, how does that align with the CI program strategy, you can see the 4 outcome areas broken down by development and humanitarian. Our humanitarian spend in the past was mostly counted around emergency response and was at about 25%. You can see that has grown to about 38% of our program implementation spending. And food and nutrition security remains by far our largest outcome area, and it will be interesting to work together to see how our spending aligns with our impact. In terms of where we're spending our money, East, Central, Southern Africa, by far, it's twice as large as the next, regions. And if we combine all of the Africa continent, that's where we spend half of our money. Obviously, that is clearly aligned with needs, but also, Middle East and North Africa, is about triple the spending of what it was 5 years ago. So I think that speaks to, us stepping up to the plate in the parts of the world where that's really needed. I'll be glad to answer any questions at the end and turn it back over to Michelle.
Peter, thanks so much. And I do think, actually, that deserves a little bit of applause for both a 16% revenue growth rate and also financial management that has continued to improve dramatically with in terms of the quality of our auditing and also in terms of the timeliness. So it's just really important gains and some things that we need to watch out for as we go forward. So in that regard, I do want you to know that we're going to do, I think probably at the next town hall, a broader FY17 look back when we have all of the numbers, when we have peers and so forth, and also when we have the chance to also sort of give an update on a quarterly basis around our goals. So we're going to do a little bit of a deep dive on our humanitarian work. We want to emphasize that we're investing in this at a time in the world where we need to be investing. Sheba Crocker is our new VP of Humanitarian Programs and Policy, has extensive experience, Assistant Secretary at the State Department, Bill and Melinda Gates, the United Nations, CSIS, and so excited about what she, in concert with the team, will continue to do in terms of leadership going forward. It is appropriate this week that we do this deep dive because you all know that World Humanitarian Day is on Saturday, and I think it just for all of us to recognize the colleagues around the world who are taking risks, who are putting themselves on the line in order to meet the most important challenges of our time. We're going to do a real immersion into CARE Yemen and what's happening there, a bit beyond the headlines and what CARE's response looks like. We are lucky and have been lucky enough to have Suha Basharan, who joined us this morning and will join us again. She's our gender advisor at CARE Yemen, and she'll sort of give you a little bit of a context around why Yemen needs you, why it needs all of us. We're going to start with a little bit of a glimpse into a video that is titled Impossible Choices, about some of the work that CARE is doing.
كان قطع وكان جي يوم 4 أيام أكل ما كان أكل مرة وباقي يوم ما باقي الجال حرام علي ولدي لا داق لقمة لا كان معنا الصبوح إن ما تحرم علي لا مسكين لا كان قد لك أي حاجة.
نحن معنا وحين أيام نجلس صغيرين نشي والله نحن نجلس صغيرين نشي جهالين يجلسوا ويبكوا ويصيحوا ما نسوي له أو ما حدا يدي لك أكلك يدي لهم باقي أكل باقي أنا على الله بس.
Suha, are you on? Okay.
Suha Bash. And gender specialist with CARE Yemen, and honored to be with you today to present the situation in Yemen. Yemen is known as underdeveloped country, and since the 90s, it has always been ranked with least developed countries in the Human Development Index. Yemen had always experienced conflict, but the current one, which outbreak in March 2015, had aggravated the humanitarian situation at all levels. The casualty toll is high, especially among civilians. Displacement has reached to 3 million people in Yemen during the last 3 years. The crisis in food insecurity increased over the last 3 years of the conflict to reach 20.7 million people. And on top of the conflict and the food crisis, the cholera outbreak is sweeping the 22 governorates out of 23 governorates in Yemen. So as we can see, the crisis scale is huge, and all humanitarian organizations are working to meet the need. CARE is one of these organizations. CARE has been working in Yemen for almost 25 years now, and we are working in partnership with local and international actors to alleviate poverty and enhance social justice. But since the conflict started, CARE focus became on humanitarian response, especially on wash and food security, reaching 1.65 million people in 9 governorates. CARE response in Yemen is built on to be gender responsive, and CARE has led the first ever gender analysis in conflict with Oxfam and GenCap in 2015-2016. And also CARE in Yemen is keen to link its emergency relief program with more structural development approaches targeting youth and women. Sorry. And why we are targeting youth and women in particular? The gender analysis shows that women, gender roles and relations has shifted during the conflict in a great deal. This is why, and women are taking more responsibility, especially in the role that is used to be designated to men. But unfortunately, they are doing this without being equipped with any skills or capacities. So investing in women at this stage will be very important. The other thing, youth are representing 75% of the population. And most of them, because they are not finding their aspiration, they are being recruited by different armed groups and joining the conflict. So they are kind of the fuel of the conflict. So we need also to invest in youth. So I gave a quick overview on the situation in Yemen. And now I would say the main points on what is needed to be done in Yemen. Of course, peace is the most need for Yemen at this stage, but since it seems not possible, the situation needs more funding to meet the growing needs. The displacement is never stopped, and the cholera breakout had added more burden on organization than before, especially to meet the needs of households that suffer from food insecurity. And besides needing more funding, the organization here are facing difficulties in meeting the requirement of the donors, where in most of the time, the donor imposed some of the conditions that without understanding the complexity of the situation in Yemen. For example, all donors or most donors require third-party monitoring, which is very complicated in the situation in Yemen. The third thing is that since the crisis in Yemen turned to be protector, so there is a need for development programs to be implemented or to be funded in Yemen alongside life-saving intervention. Thank you.
So that was a very lifelike presentation, so I wanted to thank Suha, but I think she's actually not with us now. She was with us this morning and presented that. And maybe you all, for those of you around the world and here, maybe just to see an email. It's difficult content. We now have the opportunity to hear from Wolfgang, who is our Secretary General and CEO of CARE International. Wolfgang was able to visit in the last few weeks Yemen, and he also is going to give us a little bit of context about Yemen and how it fits into the broader CARE
International. Thanks, Michelle. Just checking in. You can hear me, right?
We can hear you very well. We cannot see you, but carry on.
Okay, thanks. And good morning to Atlanta. Good day to the rest of the world, and hello from Europe. Great. So thanks for the opportunity. Really appreciate being able to add to this, not just the excellent presentation of Suha, which I don't have to really complement with additional information. She has already said Yemen is the most serious humanitarian crisis in the world. It is not just the most serious in terms of scale and intensity, it's also one of the more complicated ones. We have a looming famine for about almost 7 million people in the making. The conflict, the war has displaced 3 million people, and we have the largest cholera epidemic ever. And yes, this is complex, but on the other hand, it's pretty simple. This crisis has come up because of the civil war, about the conflict. It is not just fueled by the parties inside the country, but also the regional powers, particularly the Saudi Arabian-led coalition. And we all know that industrialized nations like the US, like European countries, are benefiting from this war through arms trades and arms deals. So there's a lot of dirty business involved here as well. I've been traveling a couple of weeks ago to and through Yemen. together with Claire Spurrell, head of our global communication. And we're quite privileged to be hosted by the Yemen team, which is doing just an outstanding job. And I have to follow Suha, particularly commending and complimenting the women in the team who are taking exemplary leadership. And that's happening despite all the challenges we have down there. Our visit was not supposed to put additional burden on the team, but we wanted to, to go visit and tell, and also increase pressure now, both on the warring parties and on the international community, to make sure that the humanitarians get better access to the affected population, and that civilians are being protected from the war. It's a terribly dangerous situation, not just for the humanitarians themselves, our colleagues who work under constant danger, but also, of course, to civilians who have been targeted and killed. We had at the end of the visit a press conference in Sana'a, led by Suha. She was facilitating, and then, of course, by a small but very powerful communication team. At Care Yemen, we had over 200 media hits all over the world. These interviews do continue. There seems to be quite an interest now, and I think we have an opportunity to influence. At the same time, after coming back, I did a member state briefing here in Geneva with member states to the UN. Again, this one also was received very, very well. And I think people do need reminders about how bad the situation is. And we will follow up discussions with the highest political levels here at the EU in particular. So now let me go a little bit to the context, and as Michelle has asked me to share a bit on what's happening at Care International, I decided not to talk about the things that you probably know about, the good discussions we had in Oslo, the new members, the strategy, but really also sharing 3 slides that we discussed in Oslo about the challenges and opportunities, if you wish, that the humanitarian situation brings to us globally. And when we look at the next slide, we see 5 corporate emergencies, 5 large humanitarian crises who are almost as bad or maybe as bad or worse as Yemen. And I hear that we are probably declaring a 6th one very soon. So this is affecting over 70 million people worldwide. I don't think worldwide we have had ever a situation like this. And I'm very, very pleased and glad to report that CARE has been able to address and reach 10% of those affected people. And that's a big ambition, and that's a big job that our colleagues out there are doing. And we're doing that with only half of the resources that we were aiming for in terms of money, support by donors, and the like. So there's one piece, obviously, that we have to ramp up. But at the same time, I think it's really, really remarkable that our country offices, our humanitarian colleagues are doing as good as they are. And the next slide shows that we're not just dealing with these 5 or 6 humanitarian crises, the large ones, but there's so much else going on in the places that we haven't declared type 4, and there's more. You heard about the terrible mudslide in Sierra Leone this week. There's big floods. So I think the humanitarian community is stretched. At the same time, we are needed. We are deeply required to provide life-saving services. So the last slide will show you basically that we don't only have a situation, but I think as CARE we have an obligation and an opportunity, and we're a bit cautious with the word opportunity, but clearly to provide leadership here in the areas where we're good at. And we are good at dealing with gender issues in emergencies. We are good at working with local partners, and we are good at leading a thoughtful response that starts with preparing for crisis and doesn't go home after a crisis is over. So linking relief and recovery to development is something that CARE is good at. And I think collectively with everyone in the CARE International family, we want to do more of that. We want to make a bigger impact. I think everyone is excited about the investment that CARE US is making in this arena. We're excited to work with Sheba as the new vice president, and of course everyone else who's taking this challenge. Thanks for the opportunity. Really appreciate it.
Wolfgang, thank you so much for joining us and for your leadership. Really appreciate that, and for your ability to tell the story of what's happening in Yemen. Wolfgang mentioned that we're still at only half of the resources that we've articulated as required in some of these contexts, and you all know the difficulty of breaking through to tell the story of what's happening around the world, and especially in a U.S. media context. So we're doing something that, in the response to the kind of scale and need that's different, and for the first time ever, 8 NGO organizations have joined together and tried to tell the story and to raise money together. And I'm really proud of the work that CARE's been doing around this. It's been led by Brian Fagans and also by Angie Moore, both from a communications perspective and from a fundraising perspective. So I've asked them to give a little update on that. Brian.
Thank you, Michelle, and thanks for the clicker. Basically, many of you in program are probably used to working with colleagues at other organizations like World Vision, Save the Children. For us in communications and fundraising, it's fairly new. We're often competitive day to day. So we came together with 7 other organizations, and if I can get the clicker to work, the 7 other organizations are World Vision, Save the Children, Mercy Corps, International Medical Corps, Oxfam, Plan, and I think I named them all. And basically, we wanted to come together, and as you can see here, we were starting from scratch. So all these brand resources, thanks to Mary Kate Wilson and our partner Porter Novelli, we had to establish a whole new brand to get people aware of the Global Emergency Response Coalition. It's similar to something many of you have seen in the UK with the Disaster Emergency Committee. And the concept, as Michelle said, is to try to break through and gain more attention and funding together than we could apart. We launched the campaign on July 17th. It lasted 12 days, and we called it America Takes Action, the Hunger Relief Fund. The good news from a media perspective is we were able to break through and get more media together than we could apart, than we had been. More than 60 media pieces across broadcast, radio, and digital. I wanted to call out our own Maureen Maruka from Kenya, who is our agriculture and market engagement lead. She did an interview with Dr. Sanjay Gupta on CNN on Facebook Live, and was viewed over 200,000 times. Our COO, Heather Higginbottom, appeared on the popular morning show Squawk Box on CNBC, and also was featured on CNN.com's Impact Your World. So we felt good about the media coverage, and the visibility also showed up in the social media space, where we had thought leaders like Sundar Pichai, the CEO of Google. We had the Gates Foundation, entertainers like Pearl Jam, and Jennifer Gardner, actress Jennifer Gardner, did a Facebook video for us. And most notably, George Clooney did a public service announcement that has run over 100 times on CNN networks, and you may continue to see in your local affiliates through the end of the year. And finally, we closed the New York Stock Exchange, rang the closing bell with our board member, Conrad Meyer, joining colleagues from the 7 other organizations. And of course, the whole point was to raise funds, and so to let you know how we did, Angie Moore, our Chief Fundraising Officer, will tell you.
Thanks, Brian. So let's see if I can get this to work. Here we go. So from a fundraising perspective, obviously raising money was a key area for us. But imagine having 8 organizations come together for the first time who normally live in a very competitive environment. And we've all come up with our own unique ways to message about these issues, raise money, and even imagery around these issues. So part of the success was actually being able to come up with shared messaging that felt good to all of us, that we felt like was also unique enough that we could all maintain our individual brands separately, because the general idea was that this is such a huge issue that we are better together than we would be individually. So actually getting it to where we could raise money together, and actually you heard Brian talk about some of the assets. You know, the GERC has its own webpage. It has its own Facebook page. So we wanted to make sure that we could connect with people all along, not just raise money. When it comes to measuring success, the money is a part of it. The collaboration is a part of it. But we also heard from our partners and our corporate alliances that this felt good to them. We had amazing corporate matches by BlackRock and PepsiCo for $2 million to motivate Americans to step up. Visa waived all of the fees for U.S. cardholders who donated during the campaign. We had agencies across all of these 8 organizations that stepped up and said, we want to help, and we'll dedicate and donate time and materials to make this happen. And even Google came to the table with something that's extremely rare. You probably have never seen it before because it is that rare. They literally, and it's hard to see here with the red arrow, they literally gave us the Google homepage. So on one day, anybody who opened the Google homepage learned about the need and the GERC. So from a straight money perspective, collectively, the campaign has raised $3.8 million. That is growing every day. Even after the campaign, we got a $150,000 anonymous check from a donor that came in after we stopped marketing. So it is still out there, and we expect that number to increase. And if you're wondering how the finances work, 85% of all the money we raise will be shared equally across the 8 organizations. It must be spent on hunger programs, and that's very carefully monitored, and it can only be in the countries that the GERC has identified for this campaign. So overall, we feel like it was a great success, and we look forward to continuing to message about it and participate as CARE. And Michelle, I'll hand it back to you.
Thanks, Angie. So I think this combines a number of the strategies, resourcing the future in new ways, an open platform in which we're collaborating in new ways, and also obviously trying to multiply our impact and trying to raise awareness about the enormous challenges that are before us. So again, I think the spirit of trying to do things in ways that will meet the scale of the challenges. In that vein, and thinking about sort of this continuum between development and humanitarian engagement, we've asked Michelle Carter, our Managing Deputy Regional Director in Southern Africa, to join us to talk about one of our impact growth strategies. I think y'all will remember that we have a variety of impact growth strategies around the world. This is one in Southern Africa. It's focused on food nutrition security, and we're seeing some great progress. So, Michelle, if you're on, I will pass it to you.
Thank you, Michelle, and greetings to all. I'm looking over the Indian Ocean as I'm here in a meeting with African governments, UN, and others talking about how do we reduce malnutrition in Southern Africa. So I think many of you know with Her Harvest, Our Future, we're looking at transforming the lives of over 10 million people in Southern Africa. And we are to that, which translates into more than half or 50% of the malnourished population in the region. As you can see in the next slide, there are some pretty shocking statistics of numbers here in Southern Africa. 54% of the population is food insecure. One of the, I think, most shocking numbers here is the 35.5% of children are stunted, which means not only, nutritionally are they stunted, but also intellectual capacity and kind of hopes and dreams for future. And as we're talking through this theme of humanitarian, you can see 47% of the region is affected by emergencies. Also, what you can see here, too, is we've picked 10 million, and that's an aggressive number, and that is a strong contribution to CARE International goals of impact on 50 million people. And obviously, this relates to the Sustainable Development Goals that all of us have committed ourselves to in the humanitarian and development community. So if we're looking at the big picture, I'm happy to say, and again, this is a real thanks to some of the work that we've been doing in CARE International with the peer system, but we were able to have a better track of where we are on things. So this year, CARE and our partners, we've reached over 7 million people in Southern Africa, which is fantastic, and a lot of that is partly due to emergency response. However, we did a very conservative estimate of where did we actually have impact on improved food and nutrition security and resilience to climate change. And that number really, we chose, and we think it's about 1.5 million people. So on one hand, it's great progress. We are hoping to keep moving forward to have a positive impact of 3.5 million in fiscal year 2008. And then a lot of this is multiplying our impact through strong partnerships, influencing African governments and donors to reach commitments and investments to smallholder women farmers. Now, the next slide you'll see has a few numbers. We've got a few slides here with numbers. Again, we would never have been able to tell these stories without these numbers, but, you know, reduced levels of food insecurity for over 300,000 people. Over 4,500 children under 5 who are able to escape stunting. Nutrition is a real key issue, and how we've moved towards better and more harmonized programming for sustainable, productive, profitable, equitable, and resilient work with women and their families. And a lot of these changes are with new strategic partners for influencing and having wider impact. One of the things that I'm happy is that we're going to be sharing our upcoming annual impact report in the next few weeks, and you'll be able to see a lot more of these numbers. We've been joining our hands with others and advocating and deepening our evidence and improving programs for wider and deeper impact. Even on the next slide, you can see resilience for those of us who believe that climate change is real. 205,000 have better skills to adapt to the effects of climate change, and many of those were women and girls. And again, the same theme of humanitarian assistance. 420,000 are reducing their vulnerabilities to shock. So those are some of the numbers. The other numbers too is this is not just food nutrition security as a standalone silo. If you look here, women's empowerment is really key to this work. 188,000 have financial inclusion. So this includes Access Africa. This includes Village Savings and Loans. So that's a very important platform for social and economic development as well as political. And speaking of political, here we have an increase in meaningful participation to the legislations, the policies at different levels. One of the things that I think is really exciting about the Impact Growth Strategy, Her Harvest, Our Future, that we're really focusing on learning and knowledge management. So one of the things that we're focusing on is financial inclusion, which is some of those numbers I just shared with you. What is climate resilient agriculture? The actual gender transformation of having conversations with families on how to divide up resources, for example, and nutrition. And all of that evidence is what we're using to influence government donors and others. So we're building up an incredible foundation and knowledge and kind of unlocking some of the truths. And all of this is for better programming, more resource mobilization, and influence positive impacts. So thanks a lot for hearing me, and I pass it back to you, Michelle.
Thank you, Michelle. Thanks so much for your leadership and for joining us for the second time today. And we're excited about the progress that we're seeing here and heartened about the possibilities that it heralds for our broader work, and look forward to being able to report and share on the impact growth strategies around the world as they continue to evolve. So thank you again. We have the opportunity now to hear from Mare to talk about people and culture. You all know that she is our VP of People and Culture. She wants to tell us a little bit about the plan for the coming year, how we all know how important it is, how foundational it is for us to build upon the talent that we have here at CARE in order to realize our ambitions. We're going to touch also upon diversity, one of our key values and one of the strategic imperatives for the coming year, and certainly something that we're all mindful of at this moment in time in the U.S. context and the urgency of our work in this regard. So Mare, I know you're with your team at a retreat. Can you hear us?
Yes, I can hear you well. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Perfect. Thank you. So, Michelle, as you say, it's so critical for us in our achievement of our strategy, how we make sure that we really have a people and culture agenda that is global for the organization. So I'm here with my team close to Atlanta in Peachtree City, really planning for the next 3 years. What do this mean to really move from being just human resources function to be a people and culture global team and be able to lead and be partnered with every one of you in really the changes that we want to achieve in our people and culture agenda. So I want to share with you very quickly 4 of the critical priorities that we think we want to focus. Some of them I'm going to explain what we are going to do in fiscal year 18, but these are for us not priorities that will just last 1 year. These are things and changes that need to last and happen for multiple years in part of the strategy. The first one is really fix the basics. Our basic services, we want to make sure we move to have them in what we call a global standard for every staff globally in care. Fiscal year 18 will be to focus mainly in our recruitment and talent acquisition service. We all agree that is something that we want to improve and strengthen, and we will see how this link also with what we are putting as commitment in our diversity and inclusion agenda. And we want to strengthen our services that come from the HR Service Center in Manila. And also I want to make sure that we start focusing much more in our onboarding. How critical it is for people to come to care. They really feel, understand the culture, understand our values, our standards, and really fit and enter into our culture. The priority number 2 is something that we were discussing kind of for many years, I will say, in care, is strengthening our talent management. That is a process that touches many different elements and how we link them more together and how we make sure that we focus strongly in increase and strengthen our pipeline for key critical positions in the organization, our succession planning processes. So on this priority, this fiscal year, I really want to focus to make sure that we identify the positions that we have bigger gaps for. We just talked recently about how we are really, having to enter to much more complex spaces of work that we can be able to really kind of enhance and strengthen our humanitarian work. So I think how we can be able to kind of making sure that we have the best people in the places to be able to deliver these very ambitious goals that we have programmatically. Also, the second important priority for fiscal year 18 for us is really talent development. So I think we want to really have a global design for our leadership development architecture, make sure that everyone understands what are the core competencies in care, what are the leadership competencies, and in that sense, be able to be clear what we can offer at the national level, what we can offer at the regional, and then at the global level. I really want to focus a lot also to make sure that we have capacity to train and bring support, coaching, and mentoring to our senior staff in all over the world. The third priority is our diversity and inclusion. Diversity and inclusion is core in our values and our mission. It is personally very close to my heart and our personal commitment, and I really want to see that we advance our strategy, really thinking about how we can be able to respond to an organization that really reflects the work that we do and really have diversity and inclusion in the center and the core of our conversations. This year, we're going to bring back a senior position that will help us to lead this conversation globally. We're going to link to conversations that already happened in the U.S. and in the regions. And also, I think I want to make sure we update our strategy. Our gender equity and diversity strategy finished in 2015. I was reviewing it very carefully, and I think there are a lot of things on that strategy that we can continue moving forward and update. And also, maybe more importantly, is not only talk about it, but walk the talk. I think we need to put goals, metrics, and accountabilities. And Michelle will take some minutes to talk a little bit about that. What are the kind of quick things that we want to make sure we can commit to everyone? The fourth last priority that we have is something called the Global Total Reward System. And this is, for me, probably one of the more revolutionary foundational change that we want to make. And it's how we can move really to have a one unique, only global philosophy of how we reward our staff. And this has something that has been discussed in CARE for the people that are long in the organization for probably 10 years, probably 10 years. And I think I want to make sure that we start really implementing some of the thinking that we were having to make sure we have, for example, equal pay for equal work, core benefits for every one of our staff, be able to identify clear career path. Everyone will know what are the things that are needed to kind of grow in the organization, be able to know what positions are really national positions, regional or global positions, and how we compensate that and allocate resources for that. So this is a very significant change process. I'm partnering with International Program Operation and some other units to make sure we can make sure this happen. But I'm very excited that we are moving this forward. There are going to be more specific announcements about that. And finally, and very connected to all of these priorities, is our staff wellness. I think it came very strongly and clearly in our cultural survey, in our recent staff wellness assessment.
Laurie, did we lose you? Or are you with us? Okay.
Sorry?
We lost you for a second.
Oh, sorry. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Good.
I
sorry.
think just the last sentence about wellness.
Yeah, in staff wellness, I think it's important that we have really a much more robust global program and support. But I'm going to focus in 18 to really focus in wellness for our colleagues that are in the more difficult environments where we work. These are really the 4 priorities, very ambitious agenda for us, and I know we're going to partner and work with every one of you to make it happen. So passing to you, Michelle, now.
Thanks, Mari. So we have a lot on the plate, but really important and work that's been building for a long time and that we want to really see move forward now. I just want to call out the third of the goals and one of our values here, because I think certainly this week in particular, but in general, I think this is key to our carrying the organization forward, and I think it's an area where we have fallen short and where we can do better. So Mari has highlighted these things: diversity and inclusion lead as one, not a panacea, but as a stepping stone. Clear accountabilities and metrics that we can drive and be responsible to. I think surely focusing on the recruitment process, and then Mari talked about the global standards and how we ensure equitable, global, true engagement around the world. So just wanted to highlight that in particular. I also wanted to, in the spirit of moving to announcements, I just was going to offer that from 11 to 11:30, if anybody was interested in just joining me in my office to talk about the context of Charlottesville, the questions that I think the nation is facing, and really certainly the mantle of leadership, of moral leadership that the president has failed to deliver against. But I think it's an opportunity for all of us to think about individually and collectively what we can do. And I know there's a variety of different conversations that are happening and some actions. And so just an invitation for those who are on the line, who want to just stay on the line, we'll switch you over to my office and we'll just have a small group informal conversation. So we have a few minutes for questions and reflections, and they can be around any of the topics we've talked about or anything that's on your mind, and to any of the people that have spoken. Any questions or any questions that you all want to deliver via the WebEx?
Okay, we have a question from Stacy. Are we feeling confident about our ability to achieve really ambitious financial goals? Was such a big jump this year. Can we do it again?
So, I think that we can and that we will, but we are, I think, are surely mindful of the fact that there are challenges before us in doing that. The U.S. government we're facing challenges contextually around where that will end up. we really are much more confident that Congress will not enforce the cuts that the Trump administration has put forward, but there are uncertainties going forward. But Tali just whispered to me as we were sitting here that we have a tradition in the fundraising department called ringing the bell, which basically means you get to ring the bell and celebrate money coming in. And there was just a $200,000 commitment that was made while we were talking to the program that Michelle Carter was addressing around Southern Africa. So I think it speaks to the ways that we've articulated programs, investment opportunities, and that momentum. So we have to build upon that and recognize that it's a big challenge and not underestimate it. But I am confident that we have the capacity and leadership to deliver, and that we'll also continue to evolve our planning as we move forward, both from a revenue and an expense side. Other questions? One question I just want to repeat from this morning that was, in essence, there's a lot of changes going on in the organization. They don't always trickle down, and the feedback from the team does not always trickle up. So how do we create an organization that is embracing and engaging in the changes? And I asked back, what do you think we could do? And I think some of the opportunities were, how do we continue to increase our internal communication? How do we break down the walls of hierarchy? I think a lot of times, as much as people say, well, it's not trickling down, sometimes ideas don't trickle up either. And so I would just encourage folks to think about sort of tearing down the walls. Don't be hesitant to share your ideas across the organization and up the ladder, and not feel like the hierarchy is so calcified that we can't break through that. Other questions? Yeah.
Yeah, Michelle, it's more a comment and a question really. Following up on what Wolfgang said, he was talking about a sixth country maybe joining the Type 4 group. This morning I was in a call, and actually the plan is that the DRC will also be raised to a Type 4 given the challenges that we're facing there. And to some key staff, both in CARE USA and outside, I sent out an email that what the country office is looking for is, serving 225,000 people. That's out of a total of 3.8 million people who are affected in DRC. They're looking for a budget of about 11 million over 2 years. The amount of money they have so far is $100,000. It's petty. And one of the challenges I think that we're facing, and that comes back to the next program, Michelle. When I look at on the TV here in the evening, it's only about Trump. And in that situation, one of the challenges I think that we have and that we should ask ourselves: how can we bring a crisis like DRC to the attention of the people and help us with the fundraising? In the present context, it's very challenging. So I'm very keen and interested to discuss that.
I think that's an enormous challenge, and I think it will continue to be, because as we all know, the trend lines show that increasingly there will be concentrations of poverty in these conflict zones. How do we draw attention to places that people may not be able to locate on a map, especially when there are multiple places and it's hard to create the narrative around it? Just as an example, I think Brian told me yesterday that that our country director was going to be on CNN around Sierra Leone, and the producer wrote back and apologized profusely that they had to cover Donald Trump. And so I think it is a challenge. I also think it's a challenge that we will wrestle with, and we can wrestle with it if for those of you who are interested in having the conversation. What do we address publicly around, for instance, the Charlottesville crisis, and how do we use our unique and differentiated platform and mission to address social justice in the broadest sense, but also around where CARE brings unique value and has a unique voice. And certainly there is an enormity of coverage around Donald Trump and his moral failings, but not so much around our collective global responsibilities to meet the crises around the world that are affecting millions of people. And I do think CARE has a unique voice in addressing that challenge. I do not know what the ticket is to breaking through, but I think it's going to take all of our creativity, and I think it's going to take the kind of collaboration that we saw with the GERC as well. So maybe we need to move to announcements, or do I need to? Okay. Any more burning questions before I go to the announcements? And as I said, I'm sticking around at 11, so you can ask me any more.
Thank you very much. And I would like to thank Mary Ford and the People and Culture team. I think this is really very critical area for all of us, as a driving force for this organization. The one issue to me, Mary Ford has already mentioned it, I think is staff wellness. This has been an issue that we're really struggling with it as an organization, trying to address it. And it has to be addressed honestly, otherwise our productivity and ability, to make change is going to be, I think it's going to be compromised. So I'm just trying to see what are probably some of the innovative ways or new approach that we will take, to address this issue. It is critical, and we have to find a better, good, innovative way, to deal with it. Thank you.
Thank you. And speaking from someone who's just opened up our Nigeria office and is been working hard in a variety of different contexts around the world. Mari, I don't know if you're still on the line.
I am.
Do you want to? Were you able to hear that question around staff wellness and how we're tackling it in an innovative way, and what the next steps might be, since we've been talking about it for a long time?
Yes. No. Thank you. And I think it was a critical question, though. I think there are some things that can be really very basic, to be honest. We have some very incredible policies. We just have recently an external assessment and say, well, your policy sounds very progressive, but you don't practice them, so consistently. So I think one thing immediately probably is not a more innovation now, but it is just, can we go back to those practices and review them, those policies and review them, and make sure that we make them happen and we have some accountabilities behind them. I'm talking, for example, our R&R policies, have the capacity to also bring some space for people to rest. I love data, so I was looking the analysis of how many people lost their leave days at the end of the year because they don't take it, and it's a big number of us, that happen. So there are some things that I found that gonna be very quickly to make sure that we can push for them to happen. On the other side, I think also I want to make sure to define what is really fixed and what is flexible. What are the things that are really particular circumstances or cultural circumstances that we can be able to analyze in every particular context. That's why now that I want to make sure that I focus this time on probably 5 countries with a more kind of challenging environments and start have this dialogue and conversation. I don't think there is something that at the global level we can resolve immediately, but I want to start kind of tackling immediately. So I will connect with you for some of the innovations that we can put together.
Thank you. So I do think partly segmenting and prioritizing is important in this, because I think if you talk about it from a global perspective, it can lose some of the texture around how are we addressing, in particular, in places of conflict, as an example. Further Q&A, feel free to email, or we're collecting some of those. I just have a couple of quick announcements. One is our annual storytelling contest. Just a reminder, we hope that we'll have participation from all of our country offices. There's prize money, but most importantly, there's the opportunity to tell extraordinary stories of resiliency and strength and courage and of CARE's work. So we hope that you will join us in that endeavor, which will launch on Monday, the 21st. And then just a couple of quick innovation updates. We have our second Scale by Design cohort that will be coming and presenting in February, so mark your calendars. We have some interesting and exciting new ways of telling the story. Stay tuned for more information about the Azraq Refugee Camp, Youth Boot and Film Camp. This is basically the auspices are a group of young people said, please stop sending CNN talking heads to tell our story. We want to tell our own stories. And so be on the lookout for that. And then finally, we are continuing to move forward with this strategy for next generation philanthropists who will not only contribute financially, but also their intellectual capital. So we'll be, we have a new leader who I think Dar will be introducing soon. So look forward to that. I do not want to skip, Joanne, the Lawson update, upgrade to version 10. I want to shout out all of the project leaders and team members and testers. I know this is a lot of work, and this is all in the spirit of undergirding our capacity to be effective and supporting all of us, and incredibly important around accountability and around financial management. So thank you for all that are involved in that, and please make sure you're getting accustomed to that next version. Finally, I just want to, we want to capture what do you want to be talking about? What are some of the things that you're not hearing about that are on your mind that we can take a kind of word cloud and carry it forward and share with you after this conversation? So as we do that, we will ask you to go to menti.com and use the code 113631. Just throw up some topics, some subjects, some ideas, some words that you think should be on the agenda as we go forward for the global dialogue and for these conversations. I think that that is the end of the announcements. We want to thank you, all of you, for all of the work that you're doing around the world and here to support in the fulfillment of our mission to defend dignity, to fight poverty, and to realize our hopes and aspirations to achieve social justice for people around the world. This is the list of goals that I guess are emerging or that emerged from this morning, or some combination. All right. So we thank you all very much for attending today. I think there are donuts in the back and some coffee. Please join in with others for conversation if you're interested in continuing the conversation around race and issues of the United States domestic context for diversity. Join me in my office. Thanks.